Good morning. Welcome to EduSet Network. Friend, as you know, we are discussing English literature and particularly 18th century English literature. And in the last lecture, we tried to understand the theoretical aspect, because you know that literature is a vast and we can't cover in 1 hour. So just a theoretical part, we will move further and we'll try to understand through examples who were the major contributor and what were the types of their writings and the different aspect of the English literature during the 18th century. And for discussion on this very topic, we have in studio the same resource person, Dr. Anand Prakash. He has been professor and taught in English literature in Delhi University for 4 decades. He has started teaching in 1965 until 2007. He taught there. And he has written extensively on the various aspects of literary theory and the cultural aesthetics trends. And he has a number of publications like Wuthering Height and Introduction. The other is the Marxist Literary Theory, and he has edited a volume or a story that has been come from the Academic Foundation Delhi. And he is a critic also. He has written criticism on the Hindi Kahani Ki Vikas Prakriya, was published by Lok Bharati publication Allahabad. And 2 of his recently published books of criticism in Hindi are समकालीन कविता, प्रशंसा और जिज्ञासा, and यथार्थवाद और जनवाद. Apart from that, he has also written and edited numerous books like 19th century thought as well as approaches to literary theory Marxism that has been published from the Worldview. And he has also done a lot of work on the Mukti Bodh, and the book name is Mukti Bodh in Our Time, that has been published in 2012 from the Lokmitra publication. And Dr. Prakash is also editor of the 2 journals, one in journal Drama Studies and the other is in Hindi in Juk Paribodh. And he is also theatre person and poet. He has scripted plays in English and Hindi both. These have been staged in Siram Center and also performed in Delhi salons. So I think his knowledge and experience will help us to understand the literature during the 18th century and 19th century. So on your behalf, I welcome him for EduSet lecture. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Amrendra. Last time, that is in the previous discussion, I talked at length about the various factors that operated in the 18th century and before, and that made possible the kind of distinctive writing that 18th century is known for. I made the point, and I just briefly mention it today, that the division of time in centuries is all arbitrary. It's convenient, that one starts from the 1700 to discuss 18th century, and whatever is written in this century is then analyzed or commented on. But time doesn't stop at a particular point, and it's not entirely new when the next stage comes. The whole thing is in some kind of a flux, some kind of a flow. And what is required is that our job is to then go back to those particular stages which may have caused the present century and its literature possible. I touched upon this yesterday, and today I just give the example of one of the major, in fact the most major writer of the 18th century, who was born in the 17th century and who died exactly in 1700. But is supposed to be the precursor of all that followed in the 18th century. His name is John Dryden. He was a poet, he was a dramatist, and he was also one of the early English critics. Dryden is mainly known for those poems which are satirical in nature, and in fact he started this genre called it's called English satire, that his name is associated with. And 2 of his books are mostly discussed in reference to satire. One is Absalom and Achitophel, and the other is MacFlecknoe. And in these two books, he's talking entirely differently. He's presenting his poetic content entirely differently than what was in vogue before. He talks tongue in cheek, he exaggerates things, he has very sharp digs at certain characters whom he's talking about, and then, through satire, his intent, his purpose comes clear. He has, for instance, to comment on the current political scene in England, and for that he takes up the figure of Absalom. Absalom is a king, and this king is otherwise quite good, quite nice. But then, if you exaggerate somebody with too much, then that figure becomes laughable. And he uses this trick even for Absalom. And then he goes on, and finally he's able to make the point in the poem. It's written in heroic couplets. I also explained what heroic couplet was. It's a unit of 2 lines in verse, and the lines rhyme. The last word rhymes, so that's a heroic couplet. So he used this, and it's a longish poem, and it captures the political atmosphere of England. That if somebody is at the head of the country, and that person is advised wrongly by others, then even if he is good, he wouldn't be able to perform his role efficiently. And this is a comment on the politics of the time. And Dryden, just take this figure. He very cleverly appreciates the king, and at the same time criticizes him. So that's what Absalom and Achitophel is known about. And the other poem is much more severe in its criticism, and that poem is MacFlecknoe, where that there is a person who is supposed to be anointed, a kind of a person, and this person is actually a moron. He's a mindless person, and then this mindlessness of the person is appreciated sky high. It's admired sky high, and with the result, that people start laughing at the cost of the person concerned. So this is a new kind of thing that started with Dryden, and Dryden wrote these poems in the last years of the 17th century. So technically, Dryden may not be an 18th century poet, but he starts a trend that in fact gets rooted in the 18th century then, and many people, in fact most of the people, poets in the 18th century, write in his style or take inspiration from him. So that's how Dryden starts this trend of satire, and it's picked up by other people later on. I'll come to that later. Then the second figure is Addison. And Addison, I said in the previous discussion, started making an experiment in prose. So he took extensively the prose for using as a means of expression, and his language was simple. And in fact, let me share it with you that till the 18th century, English prose is not used as a vehicle of expression by the writers. So writers mostly write in a language that is otherwise in tone heroic, and it's mostly verse. And people who are important, like kings and queens and princes, they do not, they are not given, prose to speak, because prose is very mundane. Prose is an everyday kind of a thing, and high and mighty, those who make policies and execute them, these people are not supposed to talk in prose. But this person then takes upon himself the responsibility of developing English prose as an effective medium of expression. And this is quite important, because English from 18th century onwards will be known for its prose works. So a new ground is broken. And in this particular case, the prose outsmarts, and it replaces the high pedestal that was earlier occupied by poetry, by verse. So Joseph Addison starts using prose as a medium, and he starts writing essays, short essays, in which he comments on the manners and the values of the period. And the other thing is that Addison is editing a magazine. it's a paper. It's called a paper, and in this paper he publishes his as well as other people's works, and very soon this paper, it's called Spectator. It becomes popular, and it starts selling in large numbers. So with this, with Edison in particular, uh, literature becomes some kind of a commodity, a thing that will be produced and sold in the market. Now that's a new element that is entering English literature. That earlier English literature was to constitute dramas which would be staged, and tickets would be sold, and only those who could afford the tickets and afford to come to London and watch the plays on a particular day, only they got a chance to do so. But if the literature is available in the market, in the form of printed book, then it's available for everybody, and people can carry the book or the paper from the city to the small towns and villages also. So it becomes largely available as a marketed commodity. So this trend of literature being produced for the market, this also starts in the 18th century, and Edison is one of the pioneers in this area who starts this paper, and in this paper he writes the short essay. I went at length talking about this in the previous discussion, but I thought I should recapitulate a few things. Then Edison's associate was Steele. He also wrote in papers, and then the two would start with the essay, and then as the essay kept on being written by these two people and many others like Johnson also later on would join them and write essays, and in these essays the ordinary problems of life, the ordinary issues of life will be discussed in such a manner that things can be understood quite easily by any reader. So literature changes its shape, its form, and its appeal. Now any common person can understand literature and apply whatever is written in a particular piece to one's own life. There is a fourth person after Johnson. I mentioned Johnson. It's the same Johnson. His full name is Samuel Johnson. This person who writes compiles the first English dictionary, and he's a great scholar, and he writes a kind of a history of, he uses history, not that he is very conscious of this, but he is using the method of history to talk about the poets of the time, and he had a plan to write in critical prose a large number of lives. He called them lives, but it were not merely lives, that is biographical accounts of writers and poets, but also discussions about their poems. So Edison and Steele were essayists, and Johnson was an essayist, but he was more than that. He was a scholar, and at the same time he was a critic. In fact, he's a major critic of not just the 18th century but of English literature as a whole. I don't think till today anybody has surpassed him in his critical skills. And whenever some serious discussion has to happen, even the 20th or 21st centuries, then Johnson is always referred to as a figure whose word will sell, whose word will carry weight. And he wrote books on and discussions on all the important poets, particularly Shakespeare. And there he raised certain issues, and I'll come to that later. So all these three people, the last three, Edison, Steele, and Johnson, they write prose. Johnson also wrote poetry, but he is not known as a poet. He is known more as a scholar, critic, and a prose writer. So then the other figure who is equally important is Jonathan Swift. You must have heard of Gulliver's Travels. That's a book that he wrote. He also wrote another book called A Tale of a Tub. And both these books are satirical in nature. In fact, so far as Gulliver's Travels is concerned, it resembles a novel. It's not a novel, but it resembles a novel. And it all operates at two levels, at the level of the serious description and at the level of a meaning and a message. So you can always deduce from what he's saying something else, a kind of a lesson. And when the real purpose of this writing, it's in prose, comes out, then you realize that he has made a scathing attack on the culture of the period. In A Tale of a Tub, he is much more direct in his attack, in his satire. And of course, there are shorter essays written by him, but then he is known mainly for his Gulliver's Travels, and A Tale of a Tub, both of which mimic, both of which copy, both of which ridicule, both of which extend beyond a point and exaggerate. And then some people even say that his writing is not merely critical, it's also venomous. So what I'm saying is that these writers in the 18th century, they use prose, and in this prose they take matters of mundane interest and they talk about them. Of course, Swift goes beyond the mundane and he talks not merely essays, but he takes up themes of religion, themes of royalty, themes of politics, etc., and even philosophy. These writers can be presented under a category of early prose writing in the 18th century. But you would realize that if prose is being written on such a large scale, then this century, the entire century, can be called a century of prose. In fact, there are many epithets, there are many adjectives, there are many names that are given to the 18th century on the strength of what these 4 or 5 writers have written. So some people say that since these people argue, they criticize, they comment, they bring in ordinary issues, etc. Therefore, they are keeping themselves away from poetry. And in fact, even those who write poetry, they write not about emotions and feelings, but about the social issues of the time. And all of them, what is common to all of them is the sense of reason. It's not the sense of emotion, it's the sense of reason that is at work. And therefore, this age can be called, as I said, as the age of prose. It can also be called the age of reason, because most of these people are using their rational faculty to take note of what is happening around them and at the same time commenting on those happenings critically. So imagine how much different the 18th century is from the 17th century in this respect, that it is using mainly prose for expressing itself, and then in their depictions of life situations, you have very critical attitudes coming out. This is, I've said about something about prose in general, essays and comments and allegories and descriptions and criticism. But now I go to the next point for which prose will finally be known later. If today we talk of prose works in literature, mostly we talk of the novel. And I told you, I said this in the previous discussion, that the novel form was born, and it evolved in the 18th century itself. And the first writers who try their hand at writing novels, these are Henry Fielding and Richardson. Richardson was senior to Henry Fielding. Richardson was born in 1689 in the 17th century itself. So when the century will begin, he will be 11 years. And he died in 1761, which means he lived for a good 72 years. And he is known mainly for 2 of his novels. One is called Pamela and the other is called Clarissa. These novels are large accounts of the people who are at the center of these novels. For instance, Pamela, both novels take their title from the main character. So in Pamela and Clarissa, and particularly in Clarissa, because Clarissa, Richardson is known more for Clarissa. So in these 2 novels, you see that both of them are women, and more than that, since in the 18th century one cannot visualize women to be active socially, and he has recognized this fact. Therefore, he has made these women figures central to the narrative. But then these women, not being active in society, will only think about whatever happens in society. And this is common about this is quite clearly the case with the women in the 18th century, that they will be mostly confined to the home, and they will look around, they will think about things, but they will never come out with specific responses. So he takes this trait as a kind of a challenge. He would say, for instance, to himself that he will write novels, where women will be the characters and they don't act. They don't, in that sense, remain, They are not active in the world outside, and yet they will be at the center, and they will in fact guide the narrative. So what the technique that he employs in order to make such a woman come alive on the page is the technique of writing letters. So in Clarissa, for instance, it's only a series of letters. So she's writing to her friend, and there she's talking about what she saw and what happened, etc., because she can watch. And she's using the medium of letters. So letter, which is also has the other word for it called epistle, and from epistle you can make the adjective epistolary. So these novels are epistolary in nature. They use the letter form, and letters are written, and when you start reading a series of letters, then you realize that after all an account is being presented through those letters. Now, because the person was, that is Richardson was writing about women who would then write letters on their own behalf, therefore they will lay bare the nature of their sensibility. So they are sensibility novels in that sense, because they talk about women who write. They don't talk about women who do anything outside and intervene in social affairs. And because women at that point of time are generally in the domain of emotion, therefore they will talk about the emotion of love, the emotion of fear, the emotion of apprehension, the thinking of being all the time careful, all the time being watched, and yet they would have their own loyalties, etc. So all these things will figure in the descriptions that occur in the novels, and it's a stereotype, and even today this stereotype continues, that women are generally emotional, and Richardson makes his women characters very emotional in nature, and because of which a large number of male writers, male readers at that time, they would not relate very well with these characters. That apart, Richardson was also accused of sentimentality, that he was not being critically aware of the role that women might be playing in life, actually behind the scenes, of course, and that they were swayed by they were swayed by emotions alone. So this became a point of contention in the 18th century, and in fact Henry Fielding attacked this writer through writing, and he started saying that emotion is not the core of literature, particularly at the time when people are using their reason, their rational faculty. Therefore, he wrote a kind of caricature of these novels. So Pamela was caricatured as by Henry Fielding with the title Shamela, as I said in the previous lecture, and more specifically the other novel, Joseph Andrews. So Pamela is a woman character, and Joseph Andrews is a male character. Pamela gives the name, the title of the novel from herself, the same way Joseph Andrews also gives the novel the name from himself. So that way Henry Fielding critiqued and he satirized these novels, and his tone became satirical. So you see that in the novel, these are the first novels written in English literature, and Richardson has gone on presenting characters in emotional terms, and maybe there are certain elements in Richardson's novels which were there in the romances of the period, and there were a large number of romances that were being translated from France, and some also were being written in England. So Henry Fielding was not happy with this kind of a writing, which was taking its appeal and effect from romances and was sentimental. So when sentimental novels came into being, then the other reactive kind of writing would be by Fielding, who will write satirical novels. So we have Richardson, who wrote these two novels. Pamela was written in 1740, just in the middle of the 18th century, and Clarissa came after 7 years, 1747. So Henry Fielding, who was his contemporary and was his junior, would be born after Richardson being born in 1689. He was born in 1707, which means 7 years after the century began, and he had a shorter life. he died in 1754, which means he lived only for 47 years. Richardson would go beyond him, and Henry Fielding's novel, the first novel, Joseph Andrews, was written in 1742. Now see, Pamela is written in 1740, so Joseph Andrews comes in 1742. So he takes these 2 years to read this novel, to make his opinion about this novel, and then will write a kind of rebuttal to this novel in literary terms. Now just see that as earlier, but much more than earlier, in fact, the 18th century would always have novels or poems, etc., which were written by a person, and then immediately there will be response in literary terms by other writers. So most of the writers and most of the writing in the 18th century would be interactive, would be contending with one another, so that one book gives rise to another book at the hands of somebody else. So Pamela is written in 1740 and Joseph Andrews written in 1742. So in these 2 years, 2 novels get written by 2 different people, and they have different approaches to life. Then Clarissa is written in 1747, and Henry Fielding writes Tom Jones in 1749. So not that Tom Jones is to do much with Clarissa, but then there is a connection, and the connection is that as Clarissa is a woman character, and she has given the title to the novel, and I said earlier, Tom Jones is a male character, and the title is given by him to the novel by Henry Fielding. Now one comment about Tom Jones is, and this comment brings out all that I've been saying so far. The comment is, and I quote, Tom Jones is a full-length comedy of unvirtuous man. So imagine, it's a comedy, and it's a full-length comedy. Full-length is actually substantial. The novel is about 800 pages in close print, and it was a kind of a tome, and it would have taken many days for people to read. And in this full-length comedy means that he was able to sustain the comic spirit right from page 1 up to the last page. And it's really a matter of great stamina that the writer can write a comic novel of this length, and he can sustain the comic spirit all through. But then the comment was that it's a full-length comedy of unvirtuous man. The man is not virtuous. Now imagine that Richardson's characters will be virtuous women, and this person says my characters will be unvirtuous. Unvirtuous would mean that he will not give them all the qualities which are known as qualities of virtuous behavior, faith in religion, faith in morality, being a kind of model of conduct and behavior for the rest of the people. He will not make his characters after this particular model, and he will make deliberately the character unvirtuous, not evil. Unvirtuous doesn't mean evil, but it only means that the person doesn't subscribe to the idea of virtues. Here, the character is not virtuous at all. And the other thing that is outside the quotation, but let me share it with you, is that Tom Jones does not come from any big family. In fact, his parentage is doubtful, and he's known as an illegitimate child of somebody. Only at the end it is revealed that he is the child of a lord. But then all through the novel he is moving around as a person who has no parents. So writing a novel and writing a novel about a character whose parentage is not known, whose family is not known, and who is not known for virtue, who is not known for honor, who is not known for dignity, morality, etc. It was a daring task, and Henry Fielding performed this task so well in literary terms that this novel is supposed to be perhaps one of the best 4 or 5 novels in English literature. Some people plot-wise say that no novel has surpassed the plot-making skills of this novel so far. Then this quotation was that it follows Clarissa. Tom Jones followed Clarissa, that is the novel, which was a full-length tragedy of virtuous woman. So the hint given is, and it's a quotation by A.R. Humphreys, a 20th century critic. What is meant by this particular description of the two novels is that if one is virtuous, then one meets a tragic fate, and if one is unvirtuous, one meets one has a comic effect about himself, and the effect is there also on the reader. Now, the word comic and tragic also have different overtones in the 20th century, in the 18th century. In the 18th century, comic is not merely laughter. Comic also means optimism, and one will find that Henry Fielding's novels are full of optimism. He doesn't bother about morality, he doesn't bother about principles, religious, faith, belief, etc. But he's a votary of living life to the full, and not being bad, not being evil, but at the same time not bothering about anything that is socially sanctioned as virtuous. So imagine, I have just referred to these two novelists who are great writers of the time, and the 18th century is known by these people, even though there were other writers also. And I'll just mention one more writer that is called Sterne, Lawrence Sterne, and he was born in 1713, just a few years later than Henry Fielding, and he died in 1768. And he is known for two of his novels, mainly Tristram Shandy and A Sentimental Journey. Tristram Shandy was written in 1760. He started writing it in 1760, and the work went on for full 7 years. And in 1767, he was able to finish the novel. And the other novel was A Sentimental Journey, which was published in 1768. Now, I'll just give a quotation about Sterne's, one of the aspects of Sterne's writing, and that will tell you as to what kind of writer he was, and how he represented or how he would not represent the usual sense in which 18th century is known. The comment goes like this: that Sterne's structure means the structure of his novel and the structure of his mind, is that of a world where the fringes of the mind encroach on its central clarities. It's a difficult sentence to read out and explain, but what is meant is that he is extending the limits of reason, and then you realize that whatever is available to us in life may be doubtful, may be dubious, may be unacceptable also, and that he at the same time he plays with words. So it's a difficult thing it's a difficult, the reading understanding his novel and making sense of it is a difficult job, because he uses language at so many levels, and he gives so many layers to the use of words that are there in his novels. So imagine that Henry Fielding writes comic writing, and his writing is able to communicate well with the reader, and Richardson appeals to the emotions of people, and Sterne in fact appeals to the intellect of the people to such an extent that people start wondering as to what he is saying, and wondering whether they have actually understood the message and the meaning of the novelist at all. So I have the second point that I first was regarding prose writing. The second point is regarding prose writing in the novel form. So these novel form has been established. It is born and it is established also in the 18th century. And these are the three writers who have established this form as something that will continue through the centuries. Like in the maybe in the next discussion, I'll take up the 19th century novel, and we'll find connections between these novels and the novels written then. Then one comes to poetry. Dryden I have already talked about, and he wrote satirical poems, and I said in the beginning that one poem was Absalom and Achitophel, and the other is Macflecknoe. Absalom and Achitophel was written in 1681. So technically, as I said, it's not a poem or a satirical verse written in the 18th century, but then it belongs to the 18th century ethos of satire, bitterness, having a dig at some people, attacking certain people, and creating a sense of anger, irritating the reader and people who are captured in the book, etc. And the same is true about like Flecknoe, which was in favor of content. In fact, this particular strand of writing, this particular kind of writing, with the satire, was taken to still greater heights by the famous poet Alexander Pope. And Pope was also born in the 17th century. His year of birth is 1688, and he died in 1744 at the age of 56 years. And in the previous discussion, I talked about the Rape of the Lock, so I'll not say much about this today. Rape of the Lock was written in 1712, and it was started in 1712 and it was finished in 1714. So it took 2 years to write, and it became a classic. Even today, in most of the Indian universities, at the undergraduate and postgraduate levels, if literature is to be, English literature is to be studied seriously, then Rape of the Lock is the prescribed textbook. But then he wrote other poems also. I referred to the poem Epistle to Dr. Arbuthnot, which was a kind of an epistle, a letter, and it's a long poem, and I talked about it, so I will not discuss it today. But the third poem that he wrote, and this is supposed to be a true epic, a poem of true epic proportions, this is called Dunciad. And this took full 5 years for Pope to write. It's a very long poem. It's a poem in cantos, and it follows very closely the style of an epic. Of course, the Rape of the Lock is called an epic. Epistle to Dr. Arbuthnot is taking its form from letter. Now, there are certain poems written by him which also have the title essay. So, which means in verse he is writing essays. But so far as Dunciad is concerned, here he is deliberately, consciously, and clearly writing an epic. And you see the trick, the kind of trick that the person has played, even in choosing the title. For instance, the famous Greek epic written by Homer is Iliad, and Iliad is the story of a character, and so it's an account of a character, and then you will have here like Iliad, you will also have Dunciad. Now the joke is about the word Dunciad, because when somebody is writing about a dunce means an idiot, a person who doesn't have any capacity to think, and a person who all the time takes words at their face value and who doesn't go beyond that. And this Alexander Pope wrote about a dunce, about an idiot. And why does he pick up an idiot to write about? Of course, in the 19th century, you will have a whole novel written, and the title will be Idiot, and that's a very serious novel. But I will not go into that. So, coming back to Dunciad by Pope, I would say that perhaps the poet is trying to communicate his general impression about the 18th century life, about the 18th century society. And he will bring in different characters, different trends of thought, and he will, put them around the main figure, and then he'll build upon this. So in a way, the symbol of the Dunciad would appear to be a symbol of the kind of idiocy that is developing, that is evolving in England at the time. And Pope was a kind of a moralist. He was not happy with the world in which he lived. He wanted to correct this world, he wanted to improve this world, and if he could not improve that, then he would at least tell his readers that the society in which they lived and he lived was beyond improvement, and therefore everybody is becoming more and more dunce-like with the passage of time, and therefore he is writing an account of the dunce, of the tendency of being an idiot who doesn't understand, who in fact is very insensitive, and for that reason becoming a threat to the existence of wisdom and rationality. So this is the theme of Dunciad, and but it's not a, it's in content it is very serious, but in tone it is not serious, because there, all the tricks, all the skills of satirical kind, they have been used here, and canto after canto, and in style, line after line, he's mimicking some of the old classical writings, and then he's talking about a dunce who will finally spread his wings all around. So I would say it's a very ambitious poem. It's a very important poem written and by Pope, and in the 18th century, critics found it awesome in its reading. It's a different matter that today the poem will not afford as much meaning as it might have done in the 18th century, because Pope was bringing in a large number of topical references in this poem, and he was. If today we read, then we have to take help from the annotations to read, and because he'll be telling us about a certain character or certain incident, and we don't know what that incident is. So maybe we find the whole thing a bit difficult to comprehend. But it is certain that the poem was ambitious, and if somebody has to really talk about the 18th century in depth and about the problems that the century faced, then this is the book that one should refer to, because this will give a clue to what 18th century stood for. So these are the satirical poems that I talked about, apart from novels. The last thing I'll take up would be the drama form. I will not dwell much on this, because drama is the weakest in the 18th century. And imagine the irony, in the 17th century drama had touched its height, its zenith, but in the 18th century it has only She Stoops to Conquer and by Goldsmith, Sheridan, The Rivals, School for Scandal, and nothing much to write about. They were light comedies, and perhaps that's how it was suited from this.
Now you could.
So now I'll because I have talked about some major writings of the 18th century, I'll make a general point and then finish the discussion today. And this general point is about nature in the 18th century. Now we do not understand nature in the sense in which these people projected nature in the 18th century. Today, whatever is associated with trees, flowers, birds, streams, the forest, the village life, that is called nature, where people are spontaneous and all. But in the 18th century, a new meaning to nature was given. In fact, that meaning, if we understand that meaning, it's a slightly difficult thing, but I'll try to explain in simple terms. If we see nature as something that helps us connect with the world in which we live, then that's the kind of nature that these people are talking about. They are not talking about trees and flowers, etc. So, for instance, if I quote from a critic, I'm not naming the critic, the universe conceived of, governed by law, with general human nature as the microcosm of this mechanical order. So basically, what law is there that is working in life? If you are able to see that law, and if you are able to understand and grasp that law, then you have understood nature. So the nature of things, the way nature exists in life, that is what nature is. Nature is not all the trees and the leaves and the greenery all around. Then another quotation is, follow nature, and this is supposed to mean that portray the world as you see it. Because the world as we see it, for instance, if I see the world in terms of the thing that people say or people react, the way that they react, then if I follow that, then I'm following nature. So the natural way, the natural behavior of men and women, naturally as they react to certain things, if that is caught in writing, that is called nature in human life. It also may mean the permanent truths underlying the individual varieties of man. Now, individually, all of us differ from one another, but there is something common in all of us. It's very difficult to find out that commonness in 10,000 people. All of us will say that these 10,000 people are different, they have different names, they come from different backgrounds, they have different parents, they've got different education, and that none is like anyone else. This is quite true. But do we forget that all these people belong to a country, to a culture, and that thing is common? If a writer is able to see this connection between all the people, because of which these people can be identified properly, then that is what nature is in the 18th century. Another quotation: obey reason, seek order and harmony in life and art. It's very difficult to see order. Order means a kind of pattern. It's very, very easy to see variety. But in the variety, if you can see order, if you can see that the same method operates, the same pattern operates, then literature catches that order. So you will see, this is what we see, that in 18th century, we get to know about the world that existed at that time, and that we are not bothered about the peculiarity of one or two people. We talk about the general views that people held and the general way in which they behaved in their life and in their situations. And writers were able to get these things clearly in their writing, and this writing then in a way united with other writings, and the characters that they depicted, those characters were united with the characters depicted in the other books. Then there is a quotation: constant order, harmony and beauty of providence, and we have to restore the decays that happened to human nature by the fall, by restoring order. Now this is taking things too far. For instance, when the fall occurred, when Adam and Eve fell from heaven and they came here, then they got some kind of a problem, some kind of a decay. So the 18th century say that its job is to bring back the old truths and the old principles of living to humankind, which after falling developed certain problems in their behavior. Then the next one is the manners of men. It is the manners of men which define the subject of poetry. It's a new definition of poetry. And now today nobody will agree with this definition, that the way people behave, the kind of manners they have, it is that should be depicted in the poem of the time. But 18th century said this, and Pope himself said, the best employment of human wit is to present human nature interestingly. So understand human nature, understand how human beings will behave, and then present these things interestingly. So these are the definitions that came up in the 18th century about writing. And if you read the novels of Fielding and Richardson and Sterne, if you read the poems of Dryden and Pope and Johnson, if you read the criticism of Johnson, then in all what is important is the connecting thread of reason. And because England for the first time was developing an ethos of reason, an ethos of philosophy, an ethos of understanding, an ethos of intellect, therefore, and their model was the ancient writing of which was informed by reason. Therefore, the 18th century was called the Augustan age, as in the case of the rule of ancient Roman King Augustus. People discussed things rather than felt, rather than emoted. They merely felt, they merely discussed. So they analyzed and they commented on. So the same way in the 18th century also, people discuss, they analyze, and they comment on, and they take a stand. So the comparison between the 18th century and the reign of Augustus is confirmed by these people all the time swearing by the idea of reason and calling themselves Augustans, and we also call the 18th century writers Augustans. Finally, following nature, understanding life, and expressing the lasting truth about it in accomplished and convincing words was a highly responsible ideal. So you will see that literature in the 18th century comes into its own in a manner in which it was not there earlier. Earlier people talked about many other things, but the 18th century is talking about the positive things of life. If there are decays, if there are immoralities, then they have to be pointed out and they have to be curbed, so that society comes back to its original order and pattern. So it's a corrective, it's a reactive, it's a uniting kind of a writing that 18th century is known for, and this is the crux of this century. And I say that this kind of meaning of nature, that human life follows certain natural principles, and that that writers are supposed to understand these natural principles and give voice to them in the writing. This is what the writing all the time is talking about, and it's for this reason that the age is rightly called the Augustan age. So with these comments, I just temporarily sum it up by saying that it's a great age, it's the age of satire, it's the age of society, it's the age when social concerns are supreme in the writing of the time. It is in this sense that 18th century is still a model for most of us who want to see literature as something positive, as not merely something sentimental and emotional, but something which is rational and which talks about politics, which talks about religion, which talks about society, talks about morality, and the whole society is seen as some kind of a unity. This unity will be broken very soon in the late 18th century, and 19th century is going to be totally different. And in that sense, in the background of reason and the Augustan wisdom, we will be discussing the later developments in English literature later. So, Mr. Amrendra, this is how I would interpret this. And
no, you very you summarized very well. But one thing which I'd like to see from the different angle, because generally the tendency is to, as we all know, that change is slower than continue. We are not adapting to the change faster. But what we see here in the 18th century literature, what we witness is the change is faster than continuity. People want to departure, I think, from the past. We see much more in dominant way than the continuity.
This is precisely what I was saying. You know, for instance, England is in fact at this point of time in the 18th century is going so fast that it will leave the entire world behind in the race. England, you know, because of this fast speed of growth, etc., will, for instance, think of colonizing India. Somebody will come to India in the 18th century and will start will give strength to the East India Company. Economy will grow. England will leave France behind, and that is because of the 17th century developments like the Civil War and the republicanism that came in the 17th century, which is nowhere else in the world. So it's a republican kind of a spirit that is continuing, and change is really, as you rightly say, change is the crux of the whole thing. So with this change, I think England will steal a march over the rest of the world.
And here too, we sometimes wonder, what was the source of her strength?
The source was, I would clearly say the source was republicanism. Because republicanism drew the energies of the entire people into the center of politics. So there was a very strong parliament. The king was only in the name, as even today the king is only in the name. And all the policies were geared towards smoothening the course of action of the merchant classes, of the productive classes. Artisans were very happy. The village was becoming totally different from what it was earlier. English village in the 18th century would be a village, where new methods of cultivation would come into effect, and there will be new crops, and English people will be expanding to the farthest corners of the world.
So we can say that all walk of life people, they come to a conclusion that, and they also started living a life comfortably. So they got that if we follow this path, not the previous path, the past path, then we will be in a better position, will have a better life. And that created a kind of will to rule over the world or whatever, yet to conquer. This is what we gather from that.
Yes, the reigning spirit of the 18th century is the spirit of optimism.
Okay.
They are becoming victorious all around, and they are consolidating the gains that they have got in the previous years. Like if there's a parliament and if all the people are taking part in the social processes, then these new things, and religion will be sent into the background.
Yeah, that's right.
At that point of time.
Because
politics.
Previously people did abstain from the religion.
Yes.
Now they witness the life,
and
the comfort of the life,
and they will get the more and more strength from the life itself.
Okay.
So it is because of this, that is called the Augustan age, and they want reason.
Okay.
So enough justice has not been done to this particular idea. But people still say that 18th century is a century of the city and doesn't bother about villages, etc. That's the point, and that's what romantics would say later. But in truth, England became a country, a unified political entity, only through the efforts of these people who visualized themselves as human beings. as citizens, as people who will work hard and who will, try to live harmoniously with the rest of the people without going into too many contentions. So there are very few divisive forces in England at that time.
So what were those threatening forces?
Threatening forces would be the earlier forces from whom privileges had been snatched, like the feudal lords. So feudal lords in the 18th century would be there, but they are butts of ridicule. For instance, in the novel Tom Jones, there are many feudal lords who look total idiots.
So how the feudal setup was different from the Indian feudal system in England?
That's a question of history, and but in India, feudal system.
In literature, we find some references.
Feudal system, generally moves around the court and moves around the land, in the villages, and in the feudal.
Because in India, this kind of setup come only after the 1793, the permanent settlement sort of thing. Then harmony was broken. In fact. Before that, the harmony was existing in the society.
But there the feudal system was broken by some kind of rise of the merchant class, and the merchant class became very, very united, and they started controlling the government then, which is not the case with India.
So economy dominated the scene.
Yes.
And that came in 18th century.
That came in the 18th century. In fact, 18th century would give rise to industrialism in the 19th century.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very important century.
Okay. So whole thing moved around that, and literature we also find such kind of.
And rise of the middle class.
Right.
This is the first rise of the middle class in the world, in the 18th century England. So if the middle classes are there, then they will think of education. They will not think of faith and praying. They will think of understanding, grasping, exploring.
Okay.
So that's what is happening at this time.
Okay, fine. So, well friends, with this word we conclude the lecture, and thank all of you for watching the lecture, and on your behalf I thank Dr. Anand Prakash for giving such an insightful lecture on this very topic. Thank you very much.